A hearty welcome to all to this webinar sponsored by the World Council of Churches, focusing urgently, prophetically, and prayerfully on the scandalous reality of femicide, violence against women and girls, witnessed to by a normalized, growing, and desperate pattern of murdered and disappeared women. In this webinar today will be live streamed. We are joined by international panelists. We will be speaking in a variety of languages, and we are using together the Zoom technology. And I'm going to invite Sarah Spiker, who has been part of the planning and support for this webinar, to give us a few tips about how we will be working together and manage the Zoom technology so that this will be a fruitful interaction. Before Sarah comes, I will say that I am Chris Ferguson, a pastor of the United Church of Canada, former General Secretary of the World Communion of Reformed Churches, presently a member of the WCRC Pilgrimage for Justice and Peace reference group, and have the honor of being one of the ambassadors for Thursdays in Black. Sarah, could you help us make best use of our time together with some pointers and information about translation?
Yes, so very much looking forward to this very rich conversation and the sharing. There is interpretation available in Portuguese, Spanish, and French, as well as speakers will be speaking in other languages. So there is also the English channel. You can find the interpretation in your lower menu. There's a little globe that says interpretation, and you can choose your channel. We are hoping to have breakout groups to discuss the issues and look at actions. So to help us make sure that languages are covered in the breakout groups, could you please rename yourself in the chat with your preferred language or the language you could go into for a breakout group? So I'm putting into the chat now just the short instructions, just to add to your name in the participant list, the language of your choice. If you encounter any problems, please just put a question in whatever language in the chat as well, and we will deal with that. Thank you.
Entonces, para decirlo en español, si uno quiere recibir traducción.
If you would like to have translation available, you need to specify as well your language, and you will be in a different group in the breakout group, depending on your language.
Avec interprétation vers le français, il faut mettre dans la liste des participants votre langue de préférence. So thanks all as we begin. We begin, as they say, urgently, prayerfully, dealing with what has emerged through our process of pilgrimage and justice and peace, and our attention to the cries of women and girls to address a phenomena that is either ignored or put forward under a different cover, normalized and not taken seriously. This dramatically is demonstrated in very specific cases, and we're going to hear witnesses to the reality of a global situation of femicide and violence against women as women. Complicated about this is that in this world fallen among thieves, there is structural systemic injustice and violences that have the profile of racial injustice, class injustices, with huge economic injustices inflicted against the poor and powerless, the marginalization and domination and oppression of indigenous peoples. And of course, in all this intersectionality, people being victims of supremacies and violence because of their sexual orientations, that the very specific focus in a larger lens of women who in their own vital spaces with their own partners are specifically victims of physical and psychological and all types of cultural violence by nature of their own, but most their own identity as women. And one of the most dramatic parts of this is the actual reality of femicide, the destruction and extinguishing of women's lives and bodies. Today, we have a webinar that is meant to raise our consciousness, to join us in prayer and lament, to engage a theology of accompaniment where we hear from specific contexts, connect the dots, and see how those contexts work together to reveal the global picture and how the global picture helps us undertake accompanying for change. So this will be both a call to action, a sharing of experiences and concerns, and a clear-eyed analysis of the theological imperatives to respond to the outrageous, unacceptable situation that goes entirely against God's will for all of creation, and that all may have life and have it abundantly. Let's join in a moment of prayer. God of life, intensely knowing to us as mother, nurturer, spirit of life, God, creator of all, you always approach us as you hear the cries of your people. Today, we lift up and walk with the cries of those who have lost their mothers and sisters, their aunts and their cousins, those, the battered and lost and destroyed bodies cry to you from the very earth. And we lift up these cries, knowing they should be converted into imperatives to us to defend and protect all lives and to change this world into a world where there is no violence against women and girls. Your very creation can live in peace and harmony, and all can know a world where life prospers. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We now are welcoming our speakers who come from different contexts, and I'm asking just for a moment as I'm locating my speakers list. We're beginning our conversation with brief statements from different contexts that will be supplemented later by a deeper and fuller conversation. So each of our speakers are asked to kind of share the clear and sharp imperative in 1 or 2 minutes of the perspective that they bring to this global witness of justice and transformation in the face of the phenomena of genocide and violence against women, lifting up the situation in third context of murdered and disappeared women. And our first speaker is Amanda Wallen, a First Nations Cree artist who uses artwork to bring awareness to world issues. Amanda, please join our conversation and bring us forward. Do we have Amanda? It's our... Amanda is not here, sorry. That was my mistake. Deeply sorry for any glitches. Valeria Gustavo is a member of Women Evangelicals for Gender Equality. And she, in that, creates a space of safety for women in a liturgical space that includes survivors and their families. And this emerged during a meeting of Pentecostal women in Caribbean, in the Caribbean Pentecostal Forum. So a special welcome to Valeria. Valeria, faz favor. Obrigado.
Obrigada.
Thank you very much. My name is Valéria Vilhena, and I'm a researcher in religion and gender. And I will be guided in my discourse by 2 points that I would like to put here for you as an introduction. First of all, we need to be sensibilized for the effective action in face of the high level of violence against women, violence and feminicide, and also against trans women, and also from a perspective of structural changes, like how we organize our lives in terms of economic ways and culturally, that's where our beliefs are, and also about the sub-notifications. So why is it so hard for women to notify, to report, and why don't they, why is it so difficult for them to report? Why don't they report this in their churches, but also in the public services as well? And so that is my introduction. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Obrigado. And we now pass to Imani Tarafare Ama, and I am welcome, a Pan-African Americans and Women Scholar, currently Research Fellow at the Institute for Gender Development Studies Regional Coordinating Office at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. And greetings and welcome, and please, the space is yours, Doctor.
Thank you so very much. And I'm so very honored to have been invited to participate in this very important conversation. As we know, femicide is an emerging category of crime, which has been defined by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, as a sex-based hate crime. It is a term broadly defined as the intentional killing of females because they're females. So this is something that we have to recognize, especially in this period of 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls. And according to ECLAC too, that there's every reason to be concerned about the increasing number of femicides in the region. And we intend to solve this problem. And we hope that this conversation can be a catalyst for us to continue our advocacy, to encourage governments to give priority to the public policies that should be aimed at preventing and eradicating all forms of violence against women. So I'm sure that we'll go more deeply into this, in the specifics of this as we have this conversation today. So over to you. That's my introduction.
Yes, thank you. Just double checking with our friends that are helping me here as I'm looking at our greetings. So we have our two initial speakers. Do we have other speakers? If I can just get a note in my chat who have been able to join at this level.
Hi, Chris and everyone else. My name is Ebony. I'm coming today from Canada and specifically from Banff, Alberta. So I come to this work from a place of research, but I also run a women's shelter here in Alberta. And just wanted to also note that I'm coming to you from Treaty 7, which comprises of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And yeah, I think I can talk a little bit about the Canadian context today. We know in Canada that Indigenous women and girls are 7 times more likely to be killed than non-Indigenous women and girls here in Canada. And I know this story is similar to what we hear globally. We also know that that trans women and queer women are also victims of violence and victim of femicide at higher rates than other women. So I can talk a little bit about that, and then also about the work the work that I do around running a women's shelter and the experiences right now related to COVID and the increase in access of folks to our services, increase in crisis calls, and then increases to wanting to access shelters. So in Canada, I'll just end it here. On any given night, more than 6,000 women and children are sleeping in violence against women's shelters. So because it isn't safe at home. So, you know, as Chris mentioned, it is an urgent call to action at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sorry for a little confusion. I mean, in one moment, we were hoping Ebony would give a more response to the other 3 speakers, but because we have fewer, you came in beautifully, Ebony, and saved us. Thank you. And we'll be hearing in more depth from you in a minute, correct? Yeah. So why don't we just say whatever our script says, Ebony, you be part of the 3-way conversation, but then we'll give you some particular time to kind of help us put a framework. Does that sound like a good plan as we're, as our Canadian metaphors, I'm a Canadian too, as we skate on the pond, try to figure out things as we move along. Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we want now to move into a more of a conversation where we now, there should be no doubt about the different levels of what we're talking about. And it's always complicated to focus on those levels. And often I come, as I say, seeking to be in all of these struggles from my place an ally, always seeking very much to try now to have an analysis that is intersectional and join the dots. But in doing so, in seeing the relationship between economic oppression, ecological oppression and aggression, seeing the motor of this through a world order that is maintained by an economic, driven by an economic neoliberal capitalist system that is defended and protected militarily by empire, that works to divide people, that creates politics of racial division, gender exploitation. In all of this intersectional analysis, the one struggle for justice, we're more than ever aware that we live in a situation of global apartheid, and that in this situation where we are divided based on logics of supremacy and domination, we have in that mix very, very specific struggles that we can't lose track of, and can't in the overall situation ever de-aggregate the special, awful, horrific truth and sin that is revealed from the fact of femicide. But we know that it doesn't simply exist in an abstract hating of women or a vulnerability of women, but in fact is one of the types of violence that keeps people in their place so that the whole system is not struggled or challenged. So that in other case, what I'm putting out to the panelists, as we understand how to stop femicide, respond to it, raise consciousness against it, we are wise to understand that the destruction of the lives of women is one of the things that breeds fear and keeps the whole system of oppression in place. And so that there is one struggle for justice. And this has now become very clear. If we had any doubts about the global nature of living in a world of inequality where supremacies keep things going, where the men, age, whiteness, all of these divisions are functional. COVID has shown this to us. We're now in a situation of rampant vaccine apartheid. This is thrown. So I want to not lose the reality of the violence against women, and particularly femicide, in some larger narrative of worldwide oppression, but nor do I want to lose from sight in solidarity with the lives lost and the people who are struggling, the reality that femicide is part of a bigger picture and is one of the mechanisms of violence and fears that keeps this world order and its sin in place. So I would invite you to come in dialogue, my sisters, however you like, for a few minutes each, but do not let my words throw you off in any way from saying what you need to say in your own context. So I don't know, Valeria, si você pode começar.
Obrigada, Reverendo Cris.
Thank you very much, Reverend Chris. I'm going to share a screen to help guide me here.
Eu não sei quem vai poder me ajudar nisso. Vocês já estão visualizando? Está em tela cheia?
Yes, so I'm just telling her, just replying to her answer.
Né?
Tá bom.
Yes, can you see? Yes.
Eu concordo muito com o Reverendo Cris que a gente
I agree with Reverend Chris that we need to think about our structural changes. We are fruit of a colonization in America and Latin America, from slavery, exploitation, patriarchy. And I already introduced my two sentences to you, basically, our guiding sentences. So I would like to continue just telling you who we are. So what is the movement EIG? And I'm coming from São Paulo. I'm speaking from São Paulo, but we are present in 9 states of Brazil. We are women, Christian women, evangelical women, and we act effectively against all types of violence and feminicide against women and the plurality of women that we have. We are a collective construction of a Christian feminism because it works from the dimension of faith of women, understanding that we have to face it also with our spirituality, because we're plural women, but we're all evangelical women, Pentecostal women, neo-Pentecostal women. So we should face this capitalism, which is patriarchal and racist, and it is a people grinding machine. We should face it with our spirituality, our Christian spirituality. And why do we? So we emerged in 2015 in the Latin American Pentecostal Forum because of the high rates, and I think this is happening everywhere, all over the world, by this rates of violence against women. So Brazil, for example, occupies the 5th place in the ranking of in the world ranking of countries with most violence against women. The previous 4 countries in this list are El Salvador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Russia. Therefore, only 4 we have 4 countries in this list here in Latin America. So just to bring you a bit of context for us to talk a little bit more about, I'm going to show you some rates in Brazil. For example, we have 180 reported rates per day. So that is equal to 66,000 cases of rapes every year of women and girls. 54% of them, most of them, are of girls up to 13 years old. And many of them, they get pregnant and they can't get to the public service of interruption of their pregnancy because they're very rare, although they are illegal. And 76% of these victims, they actually know their aggressor. So there are people that are very close to them. And also, as you know, in the pandemic, just amplified all of these rates that were already cruel before in our society. For example, in São Paulo, where I live, for the first time, we noticed that we have more women, homeless women in the situation of homelessness with their children in the city center in São Paulo. For the first time, it used to be more men, homeless men in the city center, and now we have more women and children in this condition because they had to leave their homes and they couldn't, for some reason, have access to public service because they're so scarce. So that is why it's so important for us to have actions in our churches to give these women and children services and help that they need. For example, we would like to call attention, of course, because first of all, because the high rates of violence and also the high rates of under notification. We know that we had 47,000 protective measures in 2019. So we had some sort of, because these women were at some rate, a level of having their lives were at risk. And then 52,000 in 2020. And then the first 4 months of 2021, we were already at 21,000. So I'm sure that next year, now 2022, we will have an even higher number. And we also should call attention to the high level of children that became orphans due to feminicide here in Brazil. This is especially remembering also that our health services, they see many women every single day due to violence against women. And we also need to understand that in terms of sexual violence here in Brazil, we counted 66,000, but we know that this number can be between 300 and 500,000 per year due to under notification. And one of the ways to act in terms of against violence here in Brazil through this movement that I'm part of. So in 2020, in partnership with Koinonia Ecumenical Service, we trained 700 people. We helped 700 people. Most of them were evangelical women. And we had made this campaign of training and sensibilization and to recognize the violence against women again in more than 700 people. This campaign was made up with videos and cards
and biblical texts, which previously, well, when I say previously, they're still used, but we were able to read them with a different light to bring dignity to the women and bring to the center of debate in our churches the issue of providing help against violence. So we also offered a pamphlet, an information pamphlet to help the women, to help other women in violent situations to recognize the violent cycle. And we also worked with professionals from the public services to consider the dimension of faith that these women have. So in other words, we understand this to be quite dubious. So it may mean that they don't denounce their perpetrator and they can continue in a violent relationship. But on the other hand, their faith dimension may work towards facing and going against the violence. So just to conclude, we have this tripod where we provide support and we offer continuous training to the women in this movement. And we want to bring some feminist spirituality as well. We have some monthly events with faith-based communities, and also we monitor public policies with regards to women's rights, and we are also part of the National Council for Women's Rights as a social movement. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Valeria. There was a note on the translation for the listeners that when we talk about the evangelical movement of women, this is in Portuguese in Brazil would be understood by the word we would usually use as Protestant. So thank you for that. A tripod of hope. There is a desperate situation, and there is a rising up of answers that requires new ways of understanding the Bible, new ways of women supporting each other, changes in the way the churches works, and a tripod that we can't forget: training, spiritual and liturgical support, and political action. So let's if I may call you, Imani, our next input from you will help enrich the good input we've received from Valeria. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, the mandate of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the regional coordinating office where I work is gender justice. And of course, this is not an easy objective to achieve, but that's the context within which I'm placing my comments on femicide today. So femicide often takes place in the general climate of indifference and impunity. This treatment of women can be attributed to the global construction of power relations between men and women as patriarchal. And Jamaica, of course, is no stranger to the perspective that dominant masculinity and subordinate femininity is a normative cultural binary. One reference that I'm using for this conversation is Glendine Lemard, who emphasizes that it is important to grapple with the peculiar definition of domestic violence that takes place in Jamaica, which includes social violence between strangers, not only a problem within the household, which of course differs from the conceptualization that is the norm in the United States. And as she says, in 8% of femicide, the perpetrator was the spouse or partner of the victim. And in 6% of cases, he was an acquaintance or friend of the victim. However, she expressed concern about the ambiguousness of some of the perpetrator-victim relationships, noting that most of the relationships remain undetermined and that this is an area that requires critical attention. Lemard also suggests that with women increasingly opting for independence, intentionally or by default of desertion of their partners, there's a violence backlash from men who find that they are unable to establish power over women and children using old standards of asymmetry. In drawing her conclusions, Lemard strongly recommends that an interventionist approach involving the police is as femicide is necessary, because femicide is a clear and present threat to citizen security and the building of social capital at the community level. So using a purposive sampling approach, what I did for the research that I conducted online was I identified 8 cases of femicide, not of course the only cases available, because there were many more. But I used these 8 cases to show that the violence perpetrated against women by members of the security forces demonstrates how easily women can be murdered by their partners who are involved in the serve and protect profession. So looking at all the cases, it is cause for concern that there's a growing trend of police personnel turning their deadly work tools on their intimate partners and then on themselves. Dr. Wendell Abel, who is the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of the West Indies, has called for mental screening of officers of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. However, he also acknowledged that some police personnel may be hesitant to seek help for their mental problems because that could damage their hopes for promotion. So it's ominous that career can trouble citizen security obligations to expose the officers that pose a threat to citizens in public and private domains. So as the case studies show, we need to heed Dr. Wendell Abel's recommendations in order to avoid the all too easy femicide problematic. So I'm just going to name the cases that I identified. So on June 16 in 2016, 59-year-old Ernest Douglas, a retired police inspector in St. Elizabeth, killed his common law wife, 41-year-old nail technician, Tamara McIntosh, and then shot and killed himself. Lincoln McCoy, a cop who shot his girlfriend, Jessica King, at the Errol Flynn Marina in Port Antonio on August 15 in 2013, was convicted of murder in 2016 because although he shot himself twice in the head, he did not die. On July 15, 2016, 50-year-old Paul Martin, a security guard employed to King Alarm, entered the government's tax office in downtown Kingston, confronted his common law wife of 18 years, 44-year-old Colette Hibbert, then shot her 6 times, after which he shot himself. In an incident that took place on December 22, 2015, Sidney Brown shot and killed his ex-lover, Verona Clark, in front of their 2-year-old child at a daycare center in Linstead, St. Catherine, before turning the gun on himself. On April 1st, 2016, Sergeant John Williams, formerly of the Jamaica Defense Force, killed his 42-year-old common law wife, Gail Anderson, who worked at the Hope Village Early Childhood School in Williamsfield, Manchester, and then killed himself. On January 23rd, 2016, 28-year-old Christina Dawkins, a student of the University of Technology, was killed by her common law husband, Junior Wallace, a lance corporal with the Jamaica Defense Force. On April 13 in 2014, Davian Thompson, a 31-year-old Spanish Town policeman, fatally shot Latoya Campbell Thompson at their home a day before her 28th birthday. He then shot and killed himself. So these officers in the case
Imani,
yes.
Sorry much to interrupt. I'm getting a few, I don't know if you've got your own chats. It seems if you could speak a little more loudly and closely to the microphone and a little slower. We're seeming to have a few technical problems following you, and we don't want to miss one word. So
okay, let me
you.
see if I should use a headphone. Hang on.
Yeah, that might help. Thanks so much.
Okay. Is this a sound for you? Okay, I tried to make that better. Is that better?
Okay,
Okay.
and yeah, and do go slow as the translators are trying to catch up.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So the officers in these case studies are all trained to kill people who are deemed threats, a perception that they transferred into their private lives. The use of the gun to rebuff criminal acts is a gendered and violent approach to problem solving. And this, of course, puts women and children at great risk. One of the reasons for the low number of studies carried out on murder, suicides as a single crime is that typically the two instances of death are regarded as separate crimes. However, because they occur together by a single perpetrator, they can also be considered one double crime. The murder-suicide pattern shows intentionality to harm and refusal to face the criminal responsibility. In all cases, the perpetrators of these crimes exerted emotional and physical pressure on their intimate partners, all of whom unsuccessfully attempted to leave the relationship. So a psychosocial assessment of the perpetrator shows that his refusal to face the music could provide interesting clues about the thinking that accompanies the execution of this double crime. Perhaps the fact that in the one case where the victim lived because he wasn't successful about killing himself, that is something that we should study, because he intended to leave. He didn't intend to be left behind. He just intended to victimize his wife and disappear from the scene of the crime. So the case studies are by no means exhaustive, and murder-suicide perpetrators have different patterns of behavior that may reflect their class, their race, or gender, or other identity differentiation. But the common denominator in the case of the security personnel perpetrators is the easy access to the piece of iron, as the mother of one victim lamented. The impulse to turn the gun on their significant others and themselves suggests that their employment, which legitimizes murder, desensitizes them to the value of life. And of course, femicide takes place in a context where murder is already a taken for granted norm. And unfortunately, Jamaica is numbered among the murder capitals of the world. So in conclusion, I'm suggesting that the ecumenical community should throw its weight behind advocacy for the demilitarization of the Jamaica Constabulary Force and accessory forces, which needs to be seen as a prerequisite for brokering peace. Using its considerable leverage, the church should be proactive about proposing that the paramilitary performance of the police in their jobs may be blurring the lines of propriety. This paramilitary approach to citizen security engenders fear, and it engenders instability, and it also poses a clear and present danger to the unsuspecting women who form relations with the men who cannot withstand the pressure cooked in their psyches as a result of their jobs, combined with other contending factors. So the church, I think, could educate their congregants about the roots of the police presence in our society, because they were introduced by the colonials as catchers of the enslaved here in the also in North and South America, and therefore policing in the so-called New World of the Caribbean contains the common thread of aiming to protect colonial property, the prime perception of which was then and now, unfortunately, the people are still seeing as property. So as part of the impetus to decolonize our minds and the spaces of socialization that we live in, it is incumbent on the church and their communities to rout this colonial and patriarchal perception of gender power, which needs to be the subject of an urgent transformation agenda. At the bottom line, the St. Pauline perception that women are to be submissive to their husbands, and this is interpreted to mean, to be taken literally, is a trope of power relations that also needs to be questioned and consigned to the rubbish heap of history. So I'll leave it there, and we can take up the contending issues in the discussion.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. You're bringing, along with the powerful intervention of Valeria, ranging from the overarching lens of understanding gender justice and global construction and the construction of power relationships, bringing it right down to the social reality of the impact of a militarized patriarchal police force, exploring specific cases that reveal this combination of power, toxic masculinities, and police and military power, and talking about the way that the church needs to be an agent of change, including deconstructing theologies of submission and superiority. You've brought so many elements and shown that careful research work to show what is leads us to then also know how to dismantle it. And we'll hope this will be along with the tripod that Valeria offered, good elements. Ebony, could we overburden you as our time goes on to both give responses and add your own input and do the best you can with one block of time, if we can trouble you with that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm really glad I went after Imani, because I also have a problem, not that she has a problem, but with speaking too fast. So if that happens, I'll keep an eye out in the chat and try to slow down. Yeah, I'm honored to be here today. It's morning for me, but both my other colleagues, I think, did a really good job of trying to link this concept of structural violence with how that plays out on the individual level. And this is something that I've been trying to link for a really long time, and try also to get the public to understand how these linkages exist, and then how we see an increase in domestic violence. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what's happening in terms of the women's shelters context, because that's what I do for a living. So there is a network of women's shelters called the Global Network of Women's Shelters. And when we think about interventions and ways of coming together, one of the projects that they're working on right now is to create a map globally of all of the crisis lines or phone numbers that folks could call in terms of experiencing intimate partner violence. And so we're part of that work, bringing it down a little bit to Canada. I come from the province of Alberta, and our women's shelters here are somewhat well funded compared to the rest of Canada. So it allows us to do really good work, I think. And so we serve women and children that are experiencing violence, that don't have a safe place to stay. There's lots of innovative projects that are happening globally, but specifically here too in Alberta, where we look at these models that engage the police force and take the perpetrator out of the home and keep women and children, allow them to stay in the home. So I know that's quite common, and it happens a lot, that model in Australia and New Zealand, and I think also in the UK. So we're trying to adopt some of those best practices as well. So in terms of the work that I do, we run an emergency shelter, which is short-term accommodation for those that have experienced violence. We have a really, really small shelter here in Banff. And even last year, we supported 52 women and children in that space. And I mean, we're a town of about, 2,000 people, so it's pretty dramatic. We also have a crisis line, and in COVID, we saw a 71% increase in calls to our crisis line, with 90% of those folks identifying domestic or sexual violence as the reason for their call. We also have transitional housing spaces for women and children, so longer term spaces that provide more permanent supportive housing. We do lots of outreach counseling as well for those that have experienced violence. We have a partnership here with the hospitals around our area that, so they screen at the hospitals here. It's a kind of a rural solution to domestic violence. And so anytime anyone comes into the hospital, the screening will happen. And we know here that those that are doing that screening, so often the emergency room nurse, might not be equipped to know what to do if there was a disclosure. And so there's a partnership with the shelter and the hospital that they can reach out to us, and we can respond on site to support those individuals. And we do lots of counseling as well. I think in terms of trying to link some of the, the culture that exists that kind of perpetuates some of this violence, it's also important that we're thinking about prevention, that we're going into schools, that we're talking to youth. I work for the YWCA, so that Y there is really important, standing for youth, and ensuring that, as generations grow up, we're not hopefully experiencing these same rates of violence in the way that we are now. The last thing I wanted to mention, and it's kind of a bit of a call to action, I don't know if we're at that part yet, but wanted to talk just about one of the other pieces of work that's happening here, which is related to peer kind of support and education. So there's work that's happening here that trains, everyone. We go into businesses and we go into different communities and stores and retail environments and schools and all different types of areas, and give a really quick training to just common folk around recognizing the signs of domestic violence and how to respond. Because I think what we all know, and it's been indicated here by my other colleagues, police are not always the avenue for people, and rightly so. It's not always a safe place for folks to go. So we know that people will go to their friends, their colleagues, the church, and disclose there. And so providing individuals, just lay people, the opportunity to know how to respond to that, and to believe them, and encourage them, and not necessarily to leave, but to be there by their side and have some resources. So some great work happening, but as Chris and everyone else has commented, we are experiencing a pandemic within a pandemic here, and more work needs to be done. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And we're getting from these three perspectives an incredible sense of the urgency. And thank you so much for the attention to both the honoring and making sense of the fact that these are human beings, women with names, with lives, with stories, who have to this date been unmournable, our systems and societies have not lifted up, taken care of, responsible, including the church. And so that as we receive the important statistics, the reports of the kind of work that everybody does, imagine the percentage of broken lives and bodies in a town like Banff, small town I know well, multiply that understand that we're dealing with entire institutions of patriarchy, the marriage between toxic masculinities, toxic nationalisms, and militarizations, make these the walking every day with the sisters and aunts and mothers who are being violated and attacked is also part of such a bigger thing that we could be overwhelmed. But you both, all three, have brought a sense of perspective, action at very much the local level, never losing sight of a larger social transformation that has to happen. And that is an amazing gift you've given us in this conversation. Also, each of you have touched on issues of spirituality, church, and models of accompaniment, and that's been powerful. We can take a few minutes. We're running not so good on time, but time is to be used, not for us, not against us. Could we now have some questions? I'm going to hope that the technical part here and that Reverend Nikki Ashwood will help me to see. I hope everybody through the translators can be told, if you don't know the Zoom system, how you can have your raise your hands under the reactions button. There's a chance to raise your hands, and if we could have first of all, we'll give a brief opportunity before we break into smaller groups for discussion to focus on what we've heard and how to act on what we've heard. A brief opportunity to ask questions directly to those who have shared, and also if any of the panelists would like to engage their sisters with a brief question, feel free to be part of that exchange. Who would like to make a very short question or comment? Let's have some hands, and can we identify some people that would like to move our conversation deeper? Reverend Nikki, do we see some hands? I see Cecilia, but that's just, that's a literal hand being raised. So until we hear the others, please, Cecilia.
Oi, bom dia. Valeria, muito obrigada pela sua apresentação.
Muchas gracias, Valeria. Muchas gracias por la presentación y
Valeria,
por lo
thank you
que
so
representa en
for
nuestro
your
país. Desde luego.
presentation. And
La verdad
also,
también, muchas gracias a
thank you
todas
so much
las
for the
amigas y
colleagues
colegas que han
that
estado
participated.
participando.
I'm very
Estoy muy
emotional that
emocionada
you're
de que se
working
esté
with
trabajando temas
such important themes
tan
within the
importantes en
pandemic,
esta pandemia,
and they're not only related
que no es solo
to
una
politics,
pandemia de la
policies, but
COVID, sino
also
también
about
de la
violence
violencia
against
con las
women,
mujeres,
and expressed
y
in so
ha sido
many different
expresada
ways,
de maneras
especially
tan
in terms of
diferentes,
femicide.
especialmente de los
That is
feminicidios,
is a
que es
pandemic,
algo
a
de
very
larga data
historical pandemic
y
that
que
no
lleva
one
mucho
can
tiempo ocurriendo.
speak anything against, that we all know
Me
that. So I
parece
also
una iniciativa maravillosa.
I'm very happy that we're all together in this. And my question is, what to do if the churches are not safe spaces for most of the women that undergo violence? We have a long-dated witnesses that churches may not be safe spaces, and this is a reality in all continents for women, in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. And this is a theme that we actually need to develop and work on, because in public policies, they're not, the churches also are not addressing this enough. We are leaving the patriarchy rules still, and the ecumenics are also involved in this, and we also have to report this. This is very important. So thank you very much.
I would like to respond to say, I agree with you. And in every
Imani, thank you. Sorry, just to clear, I would like to just note that if you could hold for 1 second in your good response, the Amanda, who was going to come earlier, has now joined us. And I would wonder, Imani, if you would be kind, if we could ask Amanda to just to make a brief statement before we break into
Sure, no
groups.
problem.
And sorry about that. And we'll be eager to hear your response in one moment. Amanda, welcome. And thank you. If you could unmute, and our times are a little bit discombobulated anyway, so please give us a good 3 to 5 minutes of your precious sharing. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here today. It's a great honor to be able to work collaboratively and be able to bring our thoughts and our ideas on this topic. This topic is extremely important to me because I have 2 daughters, and I've taken my daughter repeatedly to the hospital because of abuse. Both of my daughters have been on missing persons. I've worked with murdered Indigenous women, with the women that have passed on and their families. And I don't believe there's enough done. You know, I think we can all agree there's definitely not enough done. Yes, in the grassroots, yes, in our government, there is an awareness, but there certainly has to be more done with the, you know, the human trafficking. You know, I look at my daughters. One daughter was missing for 11 months. She's recently come from living under a bridge just in October to a house. That's just geography. So she's still in a very volatile relationship with no contact orders. And I mean, that could take me down a road to talk about how, you know, those no contact orders, you know, what do they really mean, you know, and what are we doing to, after dealing with this for so many years, what are we doing to help the perpetrator? We have to also think of the perpetrators and how do we deal with this? You know, we have to understand that we need to bring more awareness, have more things like this, to see the hurt and the pain of a mother who I wake up every morning wondering if my girl is still alive. And I thank God, the Creator, He's in my life and He's able to help me work with that and work with my daughter and still love unconditionally when I have to meet with the person that is beating her. You know, it's there's so many variables, and dealing with the police, you know, it's very hard when you're dealing with the police and you're having to deal with some police that just are numb to it. And it's frustrating, to say the least. You know, you reach someone at the other end sometimes that does understand, is a parent, is caring, and realizes I just want to keep my daughter alive. So again, you know, the biggest thing that I think that we can do here today is open our hearts, share our knowledge, share our stories, share our pain, and work collaboratively with each other to try and make a decrease in this globally. You know, I mean, it's Manitoba is got one of the highest rates, you know, of femicide, and I could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time. It's a very passionate topic, and I think that something can be done. I don't believe it's hopeless. I believe at one time, a few years back, I felt there is no hope. The frustration, the anguish was just feeling too much, till I realized this is what I'm meant to do, is to help people, to bring awareness, and to help them that they're going to be okay, one day at a time, because that's all the Creator gives us. It was safe.
Thank you so much for honoring your own anguish and pain, those of all those who suffer and seen it in global perspective. And we remember the words in the Bible of Rachel, whose cries could not be consoled. But those cries also are hopeful cries, hopeful, and we hear that in you as your anguish has turned into a project of hope, and we give you our great blessings and thank you for that conversation. Before you came on board, we had two questions. You've raised again the question about police violence, and one of our speakers had dealt with the whole question of militarization of police and many issues. And a speaker had also picked up the fact that we're talking about the role of the church, but dealing with the fact that the church is not safe space for so many people. And as we're convened here with a concern about what to do, Imani was about to respond to the question by Cecilia about dealing with the fact, the truth of churches as part of the problem or unsafe spaces. At least that's my words for it. If Imani just, and then we'll break into groups. We're a little bit behind on time, but if Imani, could you give a basic response?
You know, I was moved by what Amanda was saying, and in terms of her story, I moved to ask her, after the 11 months and the return, what made her allow, and I use the word advisedly, allow her daughter to go back to her partner, knowing the danger. And I think this is the crux of what the problem is, because we probably enable the perpetrators to do their harm because we allow them to be in a relationship with our relatives as a space of autonomy, when perhaps we should be more interventionist, you know, and in a similar way, we should be more interventionist with the sanctity space called the church, because the elephant in the room is that a lot of the perpetrators in the church, people know about it. People know that the little boys are being sodomized. People know the little girls are being molested, and they're not even 16 years old. People know that these so-called agents of the Lord are not performing in a holy manner. So what makes us complicit? Why is it that we stand aside and allow the crimes to continue? You know, I know it's a painful question to ask you, Amanda, but maybe you can help us to understand, even as a mother, you know, how you were able to let her go back.
Thank you for that question. Well, I didn't actually let her go back. I was looking the streets vigilantly for these 11 months in the city for my daughter. This is a man who is 32 years, who just expired last month, by the way, her ex-partner, 32 years older than my daughter, met her at 16. I phoned police, I tried intervention, I tried no contact orders. Long story short, they stayed together. I took her to the hospital with her head split open. They had to stitch her head back up. I'd bring her home. I'd have to be in the same room as the person that did this. I'm like, oh God, give me strength, you know? But yet, when this person was sober, this person was a really good person, which made me understand a lot of the issues were alcohol. Now, she did end up leaving him 2 years ago and went to somebody younger and found that person and started living under a bridge on meth, drugs. We now, when I seen her 2 weeks ago, sniffing. I mean, this is my baby girl. I'm losing her. I'm watching the shell of a person. Going back to the missing persons, they called me last October. No, pardon me, March, just in March. They said, "Hi, Amanda, we found your daughter." I said, "Oh my God, praise the Lord, you know, hallelujah. Where is she?" "Well, we can't give you her location." "Pardon me? We can't give you your location. All we can tell you is she's choosing to live homeless." I'm like, "Is there not a warrant for her arrest? Is there not something you guys can do? I need to find my daughter." They're like, "You know what, Amanda, your daughter, we got to look your daughter's okay. Your daughter is handling herself. I don't know what else you want us to tell you. We found her." You've got to be kidding me. You need to tell me what bridge, where is my daughter? Oh my gosh. Long story short, we went to the bridge to locate my daughter, who was with another abuser, now giving her the drugs. And there's absolutely nothing I can do. All I can say, Amina, is the strongest prayer I know, which is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. You know, courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. I have a situation where I wish I could. I'm calling police. I'm writing people in government. I'm raising all the flags I humanly can, and I'm not getting heard. Basically, my daughter is a grown up, and these are her choices. So as of just this last October, she now has housing, but she is still in the same situation of using, drinking, now drinking hand sanitizer. I mean, I can't believe this of my daughter. One moment, I'm just going to quickly show you this is a picture of my daughter. This is a picture of my girl. I don't know if you guys can see, you know.
Thank you for sharing that as well.
And to see this beautiful human being being taken from me, you know, I don't feel that I let it happen. I've tried everything aside from getting aggressive, which is not my nature, to say, can somebody help me, please? I don't want to lose my daughter. I don't want to, I look around and I see a lot of our First Nations people, you know, mourning and funeral after funeral. And I just want to be able to be the beacon of hope. Even though I'm hurting, the one thing I couldn't stand is when people say, I understand, unless you've been there, you know, and I'm sure many of you have, unless you live it every day, only then, you know, can you really help a person. So I had to let her go, is the answer to your question. The drugs took her, the alcohol took her, and now this man has her. And I phoned the police again, and they, again, you know, there isn't a no contact order in place. We've done a check on her for you. She's living the way she wants. There's no laws broken here, Amanda. All right, officer, thank you. I write everything down, I document it, because I'm afraid that one day, you know, it will come. I will get that knock on the door from the RCMP and say, you know, your daughter's gone. And I have two daughters. My daughter's just beginning a violent relationship, and we're starting that all over again with my 23-year-old. So
My goodness.
it's hard.
We really feel we're on sacred ground, and your having shared with us really compels us, I think, to understand that we're in a circle together here virtually. We won't break the circle, we'll stay. We won't break into breakout groups, if that's with everybody's understanding. We'll hold each other in the circle. We know that Valeria would like to respond, but also we have Everett Thompson from Bold in the United States, and there were some questions, not only about it in the impact on Indigenous women, but women of color, Black women and Afro-American women in the United States and other places. And with your permission, I would, understanding that we're holding Amanda sharing with us, and ask Everett to say a few things at whatever level he likes to, invite Valeria back, and then see where we're at with time.
Well, first, just want to give love and thanks to each of you. I am not a woman, but I love and dearly protect and support women. So I just want to say thank you for creating space for me to be here, but also thank you for the stories, your lives, and the way that you continue to fight for us, and by us, for humanity, even when we do not deserve it. I just want to say thank you. Also just want to acknowledge the grief and the heaviness and the way that we continue to fight for dignity, safety, and belonging every step of the way. And that we know that we are created by God and we're protected by our ancestors, that we are divine, that we can take up all the space, that we belong, and that we are worthy of so much more than this world can give us. And that society and particularly governments ever have afforded us. My name is Everett Thompson. I am a minister. Also, I work for BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. My work is a chaplain for Black organizers across the country to support us as we think through strategies that will allow us to actually breathe into liberation, breathe into what we believe that we deserve as Black folks here in the United States, but also around the world. And what we're very clear about within the base, or we call it Bold Nation, is that we have done, we are not protecting our Black women, our Black girls. We are not protecting our siblings by native siblings, or our brown and Indian other people of color. And that the governments and the policies that we put forth, be it the Violence Against Women's Act or anything else, even on local levels, are not enough. So how do we also embody what we call liberation in real ways? A lot of our work focuses on actually Black and brown bodies, but particularly Black trans bodies, and how the synergy between Black women and Black trans women and how they are attacked, but also how they're murdered. So far in 2022, we see 48 murders of Black trans women across the United States. And these are reported trans murders. We know that misgendering and other things will happen. And so some of these women, their names will never be reported. Some of these children will never be reported. And we're just talking about murders. We're not focusing in on suicide, which is also something that has been generated by the state and the environment, which allows someone to say, I need to take my life because I do not belong and I am not safe. And I know we're talking about this from the standpoint of the church. I would really push us to remember that we are the church. We individually make up these institutions, and so we are accountable as the church, as one, and as individuals. So what is it that we need to do individually and collectively to create spaces and institutions that allow safety, dignity, and belonging for each one of us, however we find ourselves along the journey? What do we need to do individually to create safety, dignity, and belonging for anyone who comes through the doors, or we meet in the alleyways, to allow them to know that you are a child of the Most High and protected? There are some ways that I would like to offer us. One, can you see the God in anyone else the same way you would want them to see the God in you? Are they truly your neighbor, your brother, and your sister? That would mean that regardless of what you might think they are, allow them to be self-determined and to respect who they are by saying who they are. Use their name, use their pronouns. Why is this important? That allows someone not to actually question themselves and also not to take their lives. It's these small microaggressions, these small cuts that allow these things to happen. Secondly, when we hear theology, the interpretation of theology that does not align with dignity and safety and belonging for anyone, how do we call the question in the moment to stop harm? Is it a one-on-one with your pastor? Is it a one-on-one with yourself? To really dive deep inside and find out what is the misalignment, and then how do we actually course correct in a way that allows us to hold each other, because that is what we're supposed to do. The last thing I would say, because we're always trying to say, what can we do vocally or in a bigger way? How do we also look at policies, processes, and procedures that continue to actually give life? If there's a city council debate around policing, yes, policing is a big thing, but we also govern the police. How do we think about when they're talking about standard operating procedures that we're not misgendering people, that we're allowing people to get the help they need instead of being incarcerated? Services, be it mental health services, pressing for those type of things, drug awareness, pressing for things instead of incarceration. How do we actually close the jails in some real ways? How do we also begin to, when we talk about men, and as a man myself, how do we also think about empathy? Think about a wide range of emotions. Think about how do we have these conversations around what is true masculinity and what is perceived masculinity. So again, these are things that we can do on a very localized level. It's not, we can't say that we can't do anything. There's so many things we can do if we choose to see and if we choose to move toward that. So beloveds, I ask you, for the sake of my own self, for the sake of my son, but for the sake of humanity, for each one of us, to really think about how we are engaging in this world. Never forget that we are the church. We make up these institutions, and every decision we make really is really a question around who we're willing to sacrifice and who we're willing to save. So I thank y'all for that.
Everett, amen, and we hold that great contributions from your part in reminding us very much that in the intersectionality that the whole system continues to get power to oppress because we allow any one group. So if any one of us, it's the trans community or it's open season on assault on their dignity and identity, that is a way of signaling that all of the rest of us have to keep in place and will be silenced by power and violence. And so it scales back up to Black bodies and to all. Amanda gave a powerful sharing and also mentioned in her chat and her information about legislative change. You've talked about also community action. So all the levels of this are important. Brothers and sisters, and siblings, all friends, we're trying to work with almost no time. So here's the idea. We will ask people to post on the chat, all the participants, the concerns, both about what they understand are imperative things to know and lift up, and imperatives for action. If everybody could make a contribution by chat, so it will not be lost. And now we will turn and ask each of the people that have shared, Amanda, Ebony, and Valeria. We knew you want to speak earlier, Valeria, and we will give you this opportunity. And Imani, and asking for a last word from our dear sister and very important voice in raising up issues of justice for women and gender justice, Isabel Ferry, will have a word. And we will have to end pretty much on time. And so let people know that all of this miracle has to happen in the next 6 to 8 minutes. So as you make your thoughts, and let me do it now, so there is absolutely no confusion. This could not have happened without the hard and visionary pre-work by people like Sarah Spiker and Reverend Nicole Ashwood, very much supported technically by folks and his team like Albin at the WCC, the translators, and so on. So I'm seeing that Cecilia has made a point. Everybody, please leave your contribution to the circle in this. And if now I could ask Valeria to begin our circle of concluding comments. Imani, if you would come in next, Ebony, Amanda, and then we will ask, and if Everett will excuse because he had a near to last word, we'll pass then to Isabel.
Obrigada, Reverendo Chris.
Thank you very much, Reverend Chris. I just want to reiterate what's been said. None of us women can be blamed for the violence they suffer, gender violence they suffer. For those people who are in the powers and the structure of power, it's the men's, even in the church. So sooner or later, some to a lesser or more degree, we all suffer violence. We all suffer violence, and we can't ever be blamed for that. So that's why it's important for us to work from the structural points. And as Cecilia said, I'd like to add to what Cecilia has said. Thank you, Cecilia, for your contribution. The churches are not safe spaces for us women. And I think that we've been brushing over that. And I think that this means that we don't get to the the powers that be, even within our churches. So organize our lives. They organize our wishes. Apologies, my cat is invading my lap here. They organize our wishes and our needs and our requirements, and organize sex and sexuality as well. So we have to act within these structures that organize our lives, that organize our knowledge and our know-how. They not only organize it, but they also dominate it. And
Okay. My dear sister,
muito
I want to
obrigada.
just thank you for ending on, we have to act. So as we will, can we pass then please to Imani?
Okay, so recently, I
And
don't
when
know
1 minute, please, Imani, if you can. Yeah.
Okay, so I recently heard of a pastor saying to the congregation, you know, and that's how I came to be criticizing St. Paul, because he said, you know, women, you have to understand that when you get married, you have to concede and submit to your husbands. And he actually said to the men in the congregation, the only place to rape is within marriage. And of course, he got such a big pushback against the members of the church that he resigned. But he has a doctorate. He's been the senior pastor of the church for many years. So what it is saying is that patriarchy, like we're talking about, is deeply entrenched in our cultures, is deeply entrenched in people's minds, in how they think relationships should work. And we have to talk to each other. I think the conversation that we're having this morning is critical. And a lot of times we are in our small corners, in our silences, suffering in our personal, individual ways. And I think the fact that we could compare notes with each other this morning is a big strength for the visibilizing and the making, you know, louder the protest against what so many of us experience in our everyday lives, not only in the home, but in our workplaces, because the narcissism that takes place in a lot of our workplaces and in our personal
Amen,
is something
Imani.
we have to call out.
I'm so sorry, but we'll pass now to 30 seconds to Ebony. Sorry, you're getting shorter as we go down the circle. Thank you so much, my dear sister. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm up for the challenge. And I think I'll just leave with this. You know, again, we've talked about sort of all different forms of violence and how that exists in social structures and our community and our relationships, and then at the individual level. And I think just continuing to work together and engaging with many community partners, you know, policymakers, police, and to, you know, Amanda's comment, hopefully that we can find that hope and move forward in better ways.
Thank you. And Amanda, if you could bless us with one short comment.
I just would like to thank all of you. And I think Everett pretty much summed it up. We're all related. Wekeotoin is the word. And I often say when speaking, I am a two-legged, you're a two-legged. We are on Mother Earth to protect the four-legged. I bleed red, you bleed red. Loan me your ears. Let us all come together and work. And in the church, what I think is we need to educate a lot of the people on truth and reconciliations, the 60 scoops, especially our 7 sacred teachings. It's taught about, you know, we go through the respect, the love, the courage. But one of the things is we honor women. we honor the women that we come from, the water, the life. And if we can educate on a church level and come together, say 5 clergy, 5 indigenous, and do the same thing that we're doing here. I've done it myself for 12 weeks, and it's amazing to hear the other side of the non-indigenous, how hurt they are too, and how much hurt and pain they carry for our indigenous people. So I'm just going to end with that. It's been a great honor. Wish we had more time. Bless you all.
Thank you. And you have put the words forward. This has been a great time. It has been a circle of hope. We have had panelists and others who have contributed to the urgency of naming how life is at risk, to giving name and profile to all the realities that lead to the death and disappearance of women, and then the systems that ignore and resist change so that life may prosper. We have heard the uprising of hope so that people can continue to accompany those who are survivors, so that families and others can move forward, so that churches can act, so churches can understand that they are not safe spaces and themselves need to be converted, how our theologies need to change. We have a long and growing list in the chat of all that we may need to do. We have given thanks to those who have helped put this together because we know it is part of an ongoing worldwide process. We're connecting this struggle with all the struggles to defend and protect life and to overcome supremacies and oppression. And so in the most simple of prayer, can we have a deep breath, a sense of shared silence? May every name be known and spoken, no life lost in vain. May we invite the full presence of the Spirit so that all may have life and have it in abundance. And the people said, Amen. Thank you all. This is part of an ongoing action. And we know today that we are now faced with multiple challenges that are structural, personal, spiritual, cultural, local, and that we thank very much that we have a leadership and a concern within the World Council of Churches that continues to convene us in these circles so that local and global action can be joined for peace and for hope. I've already given thanks, but we can't stress enough the thanks to all those who contributed today. Thank you and thank you.